Welcome to HMCS Haida National Historic Site, a National Historic Site administered by Parks Canada. In collaboration with Buffalo Naval Park, we're here today to show you some of the similarities and differences between a Tribal-class destroyer and a Fletcher-class destroyer. HMCS Haida was commissioned in 1943 and is one of 27 Tribal-class destroyers built and the last one that survives to this day. HMCS Haida sank or damaged 14 enemy vessels in World War II and destroyed 2.5 supply trains during the Korean War. During the ship's 20 years of service, HMCS Haida participated in operations that earned the ship 5 battle honors and became known as Canada's fighting ship. The ship was also designated the ceremonial flagship of the Royal Canadian Navy in 2018. HMCS Haida lives on today as a museum ship in Hamilton, Ontario, and is an excellent place to visit and learn about the Royal Canadian Navy during and after the Second World War.
Hello, I'm Shane Stevenson, Director of Museum Collections and Curator here at the Buffalo Naval Park. And we are very excited to be bringing you this collaboration between a couple of destroyers. A Tribal-class destroyer from the Canadian Navy, the HMCS Haida, and also USS The Sullivans. So focusing on USS The Sullivans, she was constructed in 1943 and entered World War II and then served until 1946. She was then brought back into service for the Korean conflict and served consistently from 1952 to 1965. You're going to see a lot of spaces on board, and again with the comparison with the HMCS Haida, you'll see a lot of very nice differences. So USS The Sullivans shot down 8.5 Japanese planes, helped sink a heavy cruiser, a Japanese heavy cruiser, and then served American interests during the Cold War, protecting American commerce, working with our NATO allies and fleet exercises, and then went out of service in 1965 again.
Tribal-class destroyers were designed to move fast and hit hard. In the original configuration, HMCS Haida carried 3 twin 4.7-inch and 1 twin 4-inch naval gun as its primary weapons. Unlike most other destroyer designs of the time period, the Tribal class was much more focused on naval guns over torpedoes.
When the ship was originally commissioned in September 30th, 1943, she would have had 7 Oerlikons, the 20-millimeter Oerlikons. She would have had 5 Bofor platforms for a total of 10 barrels. She would have had the depth charge racks, and she would have had some K-guns to launch depth charges off the side as well.
Over HMCS Haida's 20-year service career, the ship went through multiple refits and changes to upgrade the weapon systems, including a major refit between 1949 and 1952. When you come visit the ship today, you'll see what the ship would have looked like during its decommissioning in 1963. We are here at the forward gun mount known as B-gun. After the 49 to 52 refit, the 4.7-inch guns were replaced by these Mark 16 quick-firing 4-inch high-angle, low-angle naval guns at both the A and B gun positions. Effective against both surface and air targets, this upgrade improved HMCS Haida's anti-air capabilities without sacrificing too much surface stopping power. During the Korean War, HMCS Haida used these 4-inch guns together with the 3-inch 50 to destroy supply trains along the coast. You can still see where they kept score on B-gun. These 4-inch guns are still activated to this day and will be demonstrated daily at noon for the 2025 season. At the X-gun position, we have the 3-inch 50s, the most advanced weapon system on the ship. Developed at the end of World War II, the Mark 22 3-inch 50 caliber had a power-driven autoloader and a dedicated Mark 29 gun director aiming system, and could put out approximately 50 rounds per minute per barrel. Though it was primarily developed as an anti-aircraft gun, the 3-inch 50 was also used against surface targets.
We are now standing in one of the most modified areas for the weapons platform here on USS The Sullivans. This was where the 5-inch gun mount, Mount 53, the forward-facing aft deckhouse mount was. In 1954, as I've mentioned, they've added the 3 mounts of the 3-inch 50s, and they removed this 5-inch gun mount. So the Sullivans, unlike other Fletchers of this era, which had 5 5-inch gun mounts, only had 4 5-inch gun mounts. And that necessitated the need because we had to add a radar and a gun director for the 3-inch 50s. The 5-inch gun mounts were the standard anti-aircraft, a 55-pound shell, able to go about 8 miles. And they also had variable timing fuses in them, timed fuses, and all to shoot down the airplanes, the Japanese airplanes that were coming to attack the fleet. So in her original fitting in 1943, USS The Sullivans and all Fletchers had 7 Oerlikon single guns, 2 on starboard, 2 on port, and 3 in a gun tub on the stern. So a total of 7 guns, 7 barrels. Well, then they switched during the refit to 10 barrels across 5 twin mounts, like you see here. So they went from the singles to the twins. These Oerlikons were also the last line of defense against a kamikaze or a plane that's about ready to drop a bomb. And so sailors always said, if you heard the Oerlikons going off, you know that there was a plane that could do some serious damage to your ship.
Here we can see HMCS Haida's quadruple torpedo mount, the only World War II era weapon system that still exists on HMCS Haida. Tribal-class destroyers like HMCS Haida carried 4 British 21-inch Mark IX torpedoes. These underwater weapons allowed smaller ships like destroyers to damage larger, well-armored ships. HMCS Haida carried only 1 torpedo per tube, with no reloads on board. They carried 2 different sets of warheads, blowing head warheads for training and high-explosive Torpex warheads for combat.
Now we are standing in between the forward and the aft stack. And like all of the Fletchers of World War II, there would have been a quintuple torpedo mount here on the 01 level, which would have then launched 5 torpedoes over the main deck and into the water. So I'm standing in the second quintuple torpedo tube mount, and you can actually see the ring still on the deck. This second quintuple torpedo tube mount was removed in 1961 during one of her last weapons refits. And what they did was they added 2 Mark 32 torpedo tubes on either side, port and starboard, which carried the more modern Mark 46 electric torpedoes.
Here at the aft of the ship are the squid mortar anti-submarine weapons. These anti-sub mortars would launch 6 400-pound bombs over the ship, landing about 300 yards ahead of the bow. The squids were fired in 2 opposite triangular patterns of 3 rounds each, with the second volley fired with a slight delay. The squids would sink to the pre-programmed depth and explode, with the first 3 rounds detonating about 50 feet deeper than the next 3. This method created a larger area of effect underwater and was intended to essentially sandwich an enemy submarine between the explosions.
This was one of the first wartime modifications during the Cold War. So this is the Hedgehog system, which was an updated depth charge system to attack submarines. And these were added for the Korean conflict in 1951 when she was being refit. In this original spot, there would have been a twin Bofor here, just below the bridge in the pilot house, on port and on starboard. But when she was recommissioned in 1951, back in the shipyard, they removed those 2 twin Bofors, port and starboard, and they added the Hedgehog system, which would launch these in an elliptical pattern or an oval pattern, and they would only go off if they connected with a submarine.
Today, HMCS Haida's squid mortars are one of a few examples left in the world. Come visit and learn about all of these unique weapon systems up close.
Here we are on HMCS Haida's bridge, the command, control, and communication center for the ship. The very first thing that you notice up here is that you're completely exposed to the elements. Before the invention of radar, British ship designs of the 1930s used open bridges like this to give the officers and captain a 360-degree view for sighting enemy vessels and aircraft. You can only imagine how uncomfortable it would have been up here during the long winter nights on Arctic convoy duty in World War II, or battling typhoons in the Pacific, during 2 Korean deployments. It was from this spot here on the bridge that Commander Harry DeWolf captained HMCS Haida to become the fightingest ship in the Royal Canadian Navy. He even kept score, carving notches into the bridge trim for each enemy sunk.
A lot of ships, when you have a class that large, go through wartime modifications, and the Fletcher was no different with that. From DD-445, USS Fletcher, all the way up to DD-518 Brownson, they used a rounded bridge with the 2 bridge wings extending off, but no bridge in front. That was a wartime modification that the USS Brownson and beyond would have a squared pilot house and squared bridge like you'll see here. And that was because those earlier commanders and officers of those Fletchers, up until DD-518, said it is very hard to track targets that are cutting across your beam, going from port to starboard or starboard to port with the rounded pilot house and rounded bridge configuration. So they made those changes in the plans, and then every Fletcher became a squared off pilot house with a squared off bridge. So now we'll head out to the bridge and I can talk about some modifications there. So now we are in the bridge wings of USS The Sullivans. Again, those early Fletchers, they had a rounded bridge, but it wasn't connected cutting across. It was only a bridge wing over there on port and a bridge wing over here on starboard. Building the squared bridge allowed them to add a centerline extension to the 2 bridge wings. In World War II, the level was just to right here. We did not have windows and we did not have the protective overhead. So in World War II, it was just this level. In the Cold War, they added the windows, and then later in the Cold War, they added the overhead.
One particularly noticeable difference between the 2 ships are here in the crew's living quarters. On HMCS Haida, raiding sailors slept, ate, and lived here in the mess decks. During World War II, Royal Canadian Navy ships like HMCS Haida often employed a system called broadside messing, where sailors ate and slept in the same area that they would be doing their fighting. Dating back to the age of sail, when sailors would sling hammocks or prop up tables over the cannons in their gun deck, this system allowed the sailors' comforts to be stowed away when not needed, providing more space for them during combat.
So on ships like USS The Sullivans, berthing isn't in the mess decks like you see on the HMCS Haida. Where you sleep aboard a United States ship is where you are rated at. There are 4 divisions across 7 departments, and you sleep with other people of the same rate. So that would be operations division, that would be gunnery division, that would be an engineering spaces where you would sleep. Currently, we are in the CPO berthing here up forward on USS The Sullivans. Wartime complement on ships like the Sullivans was about 310 men. And again, they were broken up into the different divisions and different departments. One of the interesting things is that officers on a United States ship are forward near the bow, but on Haida and Canadian and British ships, they are aft near the stern. Once someone becomes an E7, they become a chief petty officer, an enlisted E7, and they get their own berthing spaces like you see here, separate from the rest of the crew. So where does the other crew sleep? Well, they are sleeping in compartments with 40, 50, 60, 70 guys. That's not an uncommon number to be sleeping next to, that number of men. But you know what? It's also not comfortable.
During the Second World War, HMCS Haida had a crew of approximately 248 men, with the lowest ranking assigned to 5 mess decks at the forward end of the ship. Here in the after upper mess deck, 50 to 60 sailors would eat, sleep, and relax. After the ship, the officers' quarters on board HMCS Haida were much more luxurious. Up to 18 officers slept here, 2 to a cabin, with the executive officer, the engineering officer, and the captain being the only crew members on board to have their own cabins on the ship. Here in the wardroom, officers could customize it as they wished to make it a little bit more homey. And it was the only space on board the ship that the captain could only enter by invitation. Unlike their American counterparts, they were even allowed to purchase liquor and spirits from their own canteen, while the raiding sailors got a daily rum ration.
Now we're standing in the aft engine room of USS The Sullivans. For ships of the U.S. Navy, destroyers and larger, it was this system and this placement of the engineering spaces that cut across all of the different classes.
Meanwhile, tribal-class destroyers built for the Royal Canadian Navy had a very different design for their propulsion system. While the Fletcher class had more fail-safes by design, the older tribal classes were considerably less complicated. Unlike USS The Sullivans, HMCS Haida has a single engine room, featuring two 22,000 shaft horsepower Parsons steam engines in a side-by-side configuration. To power these turbines, superheated steam was generated in 3 boilers forward of the engine room. The turbines powered the propeller shafts via the gearing room aft of the engines. Despite having significantly less shaft horsepower than the Fletcher class, the tribals were still rated for a top speed of 36.5 knots, and anecdotally could get above 40 knots in the right conditions. Today, HMCS Haida's engine room is in a restored condition and is lovingly maintained and interpreted by volunteer Marg Mathers, one of the first female stokers in the Royal Canadian Navy.
USS The Sullivans, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, aircraft carriers, they all had redundant systems with different spaces. Right, you've seen how beautiful the HMCS Haida engine room is, and their configuration is much different. So I'll explain the difference here is a forward boiler room, the forward engine room, the aft boiler room, the aft engine room. So the forward boiler room and the forward engine room controlled the starboard shaft, which led out to the starboard prop. The aft boiler room and the aft engine room were for the port side shaft. In the boiler rooms, there were 2 boilers each, so a total of 4, and they can produce saturated steam at 650 pounds per square inch, or superheated steam at 850 pounds per square inch. That got moved into our high pressure turbine here, though we also have an astern turbine and a cruising turbine. So no story of the USS The Sullivans can be complete without talking a little bit about the 5 brothers from Waterloo, Iowa. In World War II, this is where the 5-inch practice loader was, and the quarterdeck was on the aft of the ship. In the Cold War, they moved the 5-inch practice loader, and they began painting the shamrock, the ship emblem, on the quarterdeck here. And we have placed out the gunpowder casings, right, 4 or 5-inch gun, with the names and the ages that they perished of the 5 Sullivan brothers. And this ship brings the luck of the Irish to any fleet that is attached to. And we always honor and remember the 5 brothers and the whole Sullivan family as we tell the story of the ship.
By the 1960s, HMCS Haida was beginning to show its age, and plans were being made for the ship to meet its fate in the scrapyard. Determined to save the ship, a group of individuals came together to form Haida Incorporated and gathered enough cash to buy the ship from the Government of Canada. Originally docked at Ontario Place in Toronto, HMCS Haida continued its service as an attraction for visitors across the country. In 2002, ownership was transferred to Parks Canada, and the ship was restored and relocated to its current mooring here at Pier 9 in Hamilton, Ontario.
By 1965, like HMCS Haida, USS The Sullivans had really begun to show her age. In the early 1950s, the U.S. Navy and shipyards were beginning to develop the Mitcher class and the Forrest Sherman class. And then certainly by the late 50s, the Adams class were being developed. And for ships like the Fletcher and the Tribal-class destroyer in Hamilton, Ontario. They couldn't update these ships anymore without making major changes. So USS The Sullivans was decommissioned in 1965. She was in the Philadelphia shipyard until 1977, when the entity known as the Buffalo Naval Park picked her and the USS Little Rock up and accepted them as museum ships. They traversed the St. Lawrence Seaway into Lake Ontario, into the Welland Canal, into Lake Erie, and here where they sit in the Buffalo River.
Located a little over an hour's drive away from each other, these two historic warships are both worth the visit. See for yourself the differences in US and British ship design and learn all about the experiences of Canadian and American sailors in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s.